Hello everyone. Today I'll be showing you how to use a package I discovered called DPLYR. And this package acts as an alternative to base R code, and it's going to provide the user with some consistent verbs and functions that relieve some of the burden associated with the data manipulation process. The data I'll be using for this tutorial is comprised of statistics for running backs in the NFL during the current 2021 season. For those of you that are familiar with fantasy football, these statistics are extremely vital in selecting which players to draft to your team's roster and include in your lineup on a weekly basis. As an avid fantasy football enthusiast, I believe this data could be very useful in demonstrating the use of the DPLYR package. So the data is exported from a website known as fantasypros.com, and it's one of the top resources for fantasy football managers like myself. And we use, the rankings and statistics to make lineup decisions. And this table is simply a list of the top running backs and their respective statistics as they relate to rushing and receiving. So for time purposes, I have already created an R script titled DPLYR tutorial. I have uploaded the data from fantasypros.com and installed the DPLYR package that we will be using today. All of you should be familiar how to get set up for this tutorial. And once we're all set up, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a little note for ourselves, and we'll just title this load our package, and we'll type in library and the name of the package, which is DPLYR, and run that. So once DPLYR is loaded up, next step will be to import our data, and we'll do that. Data, assignment operator, read CSV, and this is a little bit of a longer one. Fantasy Pros _ 2021, and yep, like I was saying, so these statistics are current through week 13 of the NFL season. So this is pulled from their week 14 rankings, so trying to help you out setting your lineup for this week based on these statistics through the first 13 weeks. So once we do that, we'll go ahead and run. Oh, I forgot my CSV. Sorry. Go ahead and run that. So first thing we'll do is we'll pop into our data, just kind of take a quick look and see what we got. So we have the player's rank as it relates to fantasy points, the player's name, the team they play for, total fantasy points, rushing attempts, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, and then also their receiving targets, receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. So come back over to our R script, and we will create a little note for ourselves. I just want to take a look at some summary statistics before we kind of get into running our DPLYR functions. So summary and data. Go ahead and run that. So that'll just kind of give us an idea of, min, max for all of those variables. And it'll be a good reference point as we start to work through DPLYR. So now that we're all set up, we can create another note here, and it's going to be perform DPLYR functions. And as I mentioned earlier, DPLYR provides simplicity and clarity in our code, and it's going to make it easier to read and follow as we initiate these different functions. So the three that I'll be demonstrating today are filter, select, and mutate. And as a fantasy football manager, for the purpose of this exercise, I am interested in analyzing these statistics for the top running backs and identifying which players also succeed as a pass catcher for their respective teams. And DPLYR is going to help us isolate those players using clean code and even help us generate a new statistic that will allow us to see just how effective these players are on a per catch basis. So after I took a look at the summary statistics and keeping in mind of what the goal of this exercise is, I want to take a deeper look at the receptions variable. So we'll see that here. And I want to essentially, isolate my new list to include running backs that will have a reception total of more than 13. So that's going to be the threshold that we're going to work through. So essentially what I'll do here is I'm going to create the new name, and it's going to be RB for running back, and then it's going to be 13 plus receptions. And then use our assignment operator and the name of the data. And then we're going to put a weird looking function in, little symbol in here. This is called the piping function. And for some reason it doesn't work on my iPad, but Control-Shift-M will be the shortcut on Windows, and Command-Shift-M on the Mac. And essentially all it does is it uses our master data set, and it's going to assign it as the first argument in our function, and it eliminates the need to constantly refer to this data as we continue to build our code, which is part of the simplicity that DPLYR offers. So after we add our piping symbol, we can drop down here, and I'm going to indicate the first function, which is filter. And then in parentheses, we specify what we're looking for in our filter data, which is running backs with 13 or more receptions. So we'll do receptions greater than 13, and we can go ahead and run that. And as you can see, we have a new data set. So come over to receptions, and there are no running backs on this list that have less than 13 receptions. So we got what we were looking for with the filter function. But now, kind of taking a look at this new data set, we're not necessarily interested in the rushing data associated with these players. So that'll tie into our next function, which will be to select. And then actually before we do that, we're going to go ahead and add our pipe. Very frustrating to have to type that out every time. But so we got that in there. And all I'm going to do in the parentheses here is list the variables that we're interested in having. So I'm going to go ahead and include player name. We want to throw in fantasy points, targets, receptions, receiving yards. So that's going to be, yards. And also receiving touchdowns. So TDS 1. So once we have that all set up, we can go ahead and run. And you'll see our data has changed once again. And now our rushing data has been removed, and we have isolated the receiving data. So this is all good. And then we can come back over to our R script. And the last function that I'll be demonstrating, which I find to be very useful, is the mutate function. So like I mentioned earlier, we can generate a new statistic that will allow us to see just how effective these players are on a per catch basis. And there's a stat that exists in football, and will be very useful for highlighting efficiency in the passing game, and it's yards per reception. So using DPLYR and the mutate function, we can calculate yards per reception and include this stat in our new data. So to do this, first we'll add piping function, and we can then go ahead and type in our function, which is mutate. And then from here, all we're gonna do is indicate the new variable that we will be creating, which is I'll do YDS for yards per reception, and an equal sign. And then the formula for calculating yards per reception, which is total receiving yards, so YDS 1, and that's going to be divided by the total number of receptions. So let's go ahead and run it. We have a new variable that's been created, and if we come in, we can see that yards per reception has been added, and we can very simply go ahead and take a look. Looks like Cordarrelle Patterson on the Falcons is quote unquote the most efficient running back that operates also as a receiver, averaging almost 12 yards per reception. And there's some guys that are right on his tail: Ty Johnson, James Conner. But and then obviously from here we can do a lot more with this data. There are many more functions within the package that can be very useful. Unfortunately, I don't have time to cover them all today. However, these 3 functions are a great starting point for anyone looking to potentially include this package in their final project for Module 7. And I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial, and happy holidays. Take care.